Hello，你好，Welcome back，欢迎回来to Wisdom Wednesday with Johnny Tiger. The date is November 23rd, 2022, and yes, I'm still sick, although I think I sound a little bit better than yesterday. I definitely feel a little bit better. Uh, e- Enough so that I'm starting to feel a bit restless. You know how sometimes when you're sick and you end up telling yourself to sleep, 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 and rest and all that stuff, but after a few days and you start to feel better, you start to get really bored, really restless, feel like you are not being a productive citizen of the world, and you should get off your lazy ass and start being more productive. Yeah, ignore that little voice in there. Uh, if you hear that little voice, tell it to go back to bed. You need to rest some more. Okay? That's very important. I have so many times when I got sick in the past, and after a few days of rest, there's a little voice inside. Okay, that's enough. You need to get up and do some work, work out, and get back to work. And because I was not as good as ignoring that little voice in there, I ended up staying sick for a heck of a long time. There was one time that I had the flu, and it stayed with me for almost 2 months because of that. So yeah, uh, just like when the doctors prescribe you antibiotic, they always tell you you need to finish all the pills. Even when you think you feel better and you don't need the pills anymore, you need to keep it up. Otherwise, the sickness will come back. Rest and hydration is the same way. Even though you start to feel better, you still need to keep it up. If nothing else, I guess that is Wisdom Wednesday and for the wisdom for today. um, but no, today we actually have something else to talk about. Today we're going to talk about shoes. Yeah, the shoes on your feet. Did Chinese people invent shoes? Well, I mean, I can't say that they did because there's no indication that they invented before anyone else. But uh, in early 2000, in the Henan province, a pair of shoes was unearthed by archaeologists, and they date back to over 5,000 years ago. Now, these were not like shoes like we have today. These were just uh, leather, very crude animal skin, stitched together, tied together, so they could fit over people's feet. So, I mean, then definitely not what we think of as shoes today. Uh, but at least that indicates that about 5,000 years ago, Chinese people already stopped walking around barefoot. Now, shoes in Mandarin is 鞋子, 鞋子, that's like Shia and Je, 鞋子. Technically, it's just 鞋, 字, it's just uh, second word added on, so it's not a single syllable. Slippers, house shoes, sandals, these are called 拖鞋, 拖鞋, Twosshia, meaning the shoes that you drag on your feet. Dress shoes are called 皮鞋, Peshia, mean leather shoes. Runners are called 球鞋, 球鞋, chou, SHIA, meaning shoes that you play balls in. And of course, we can't talk about shoes without also mentioning socks. In Mandarin, socks is called 袜子, 袜子, WAJE, 袜子. Again, technically just 袜, but Chinese people really hate single syllables, so we sometimes will add 字 in the end to make it easier to say. So shoes, 鞋子, socks, 袜子. So who is a guy who is largely credited for inventing shoes in Chinese history? Well, interestingly enough, even though uh, the first pair of shoes, or the earliest example of shoes that has been dug up, was shown to be over 5,000 years old. The actual invention of shoes were majority of the time credited to a guy by the name of Sean Bean. Yeah, no, not the British actor who played Boromir in the Lord of the Ring. Not Sean Bean, but Sean Bean in Chinese history lived around 400 years BC, and he was one of the greatest strategists, one tactician and minister of his time. This was during the time when China was fractured into many, many little kingdoms. And Sean Bean was the minister for one of these kingdoms, and he was one of the greatest uh, military genius of his time. Now, the story goes that when Sean Bean was young, him and his best friend, a guy by the name of Pon, the two of them decided to go study under one of the immortal, a demigod that lived in the mountain, uh, and they were both going to learn anything that this immortal master was going to teach them, such as strategy, martial arts, uh, uh, knowledge of the universe, psychology, how to be a good leader, and all that stuff. And they were going to uh, be the greatest heroes of their time. Yeah, it sounds like I'm reciting story from an anime or a cartoon, but this is actually how the folklore was written uh, 3 or 400 BC. This is it's like, even back then, people had the imagination to come up with a plot like this. So, anyway, back to our story. Sean Bean and Pon went to study under this immortal master, and both of them became very, very good at the art of war. However, Sean Bean was a little bit smarter, a little bit better. So Pawn became the second best, and Pawn wouldn't have that. So Pawn asked Sean Bean to come to his house to have a drink, and he poisoned the wine and imprisoned Sean Bean in his basement to make sure that Sean Bean would never escape. Pawn also broke his both of his legs, so he wouldn't be able to walk. Sean Bean was imprisoned in Pond's basement uh, for several years before he finally tricked Pond into lowering his guard, and he was able to save himself and escape. By this time, because Sean Bean has been uh, imprisoned, no one's heard of him, and Pond had been out there selling his services to the emperor, to the kings and queens to fight in their wars. So Pan was the greatest hero in the entire uh, China. Soon after Sean Bean escaped, he went to one of the kings and he said, I'm going to be your minister. I'm going to be your general. And I'm going to show you how to defeat this pawn guy. The king was a little bit dubious about it because, hey, you're a cripple. You can't even walk. Like, how are you going to fight in war? How are you going to do this? So Shan Bin asked the king to bring him the best leather maker of the time. And he drew a diagram. He designed what amount to the first pair of prostheses uh, in Chinese history. He had them make a super uh, tall pair of boots, boots that would come all the way up to his hips. And these boots have to be super, super stiff. They're like stiff leather, the stiffest leather they could make, reinforced with wood and armor. So even though his legs were broken, it's mostly his knee, the from his knee down that were broken. So by strapping on this pair of hip-high boots that were stiff enough to hold him up, now Sean Bean was able to move about and walk. He couldn't walk very well, but he could at least walk under his own power. After that, Sean Bean also commissioned a chariot to be made so he could direct the warfare, direct the battle from atop the chariot, being pulled by 8 horses. And true to his word, in 353 BC, the forces of Sean Bean went up against the forces of Pan. And this part is real history. Sean Bean's forces annihilated Pan's forces, and Sean Bean, from that point on, became one of the best known generals in Chinese history. And because of his in inventing this pair of boots that would support him and allow him to walk, he also became uh, widely known as the Grand Master of shoemakers in China. Now, when it comes to shoes as a gift in Chinese culture, it's quite a conflicted, uh, debatable topic. Many people, especially the more modern Chinese, will get offended if you give them shoes as gift, because the word 鞋 is sounds the same as the word for evil, yeah, which is also 邪. Also, 邪 is also the word for being crooked. Being crooked is not a good thing. So, uh, just based on the word alone, some people do have a bit of a taboo with receiving shoes as gift. However, that has not always been the case. In fact, throughout Chinese history, if a woman fell in love with a man, the best way, the quickest, most sure way to drop the hint to let them know was for the woman to make them a pair of shoes, because shoes always come in pairs. So when you give someone that you love a pair of shoes, that's a sort of have the uh, idea that you're going to be a pair, you're going to stay together forever. So throughout Chinese history for thousands of years, if a woman was to give a man a pair of shoes, that's her way of telling him, "Hey, I really like you. I would like to be your friend, and maybe more. And yeah, this is as direct as I'm going to be." That is one of the most blunt and direct way a woman had of telling guy, she fancied him. Another instance where giving of the shoes was customary was when people were getting married. Usually, when people are getting married, all the elders in the family start making shoes. It actually would become a little bit of a shoemaking contest as all the aunts and grandmas and grannies and great aunts they all sit down and start making shoes to gift to the newlywed as wedding shoes. And quite often, these wedding shoes uh, would have little hints, rolled up paper, little booklet hidden in them. Uh, because, you know, back then, the Chinese people, they were not very good at sex education and all that stuff. And a lot of times they worried that, in the young couples getting married, do they know what they're supposed to do? So these aunts and grandmas and moms and all these elderly women in the family making the wedding shoes, they would find little, let's just say, tutorials or Kama Sutra or little passages in poetry that they thought that would inspire the young couple to do their thing and quickly produce children. And they would put these parchment, these little notes and hints inside the wedding shoes. So it was a little bit interesting for newlyweds to feel inside the wedding shoes and see what all they could find in there. Quite an interesting tradition. Speaking of handmade shoes, which was really, really a big thing in Chinese culture, all the way up to around, if it's just 40, 50 years ago. I remember when I was little, there was still a lot of aunties and older ladies that would spend a lot of time handmade shoes for the young ones in the family. Speaking of handmaking shoes, one of the most prolific, long-standing, very cute tradition is the making of the tiger head shoes. Now, what in the world are tiger head shoes? Well, so those of you that are so inclined can Google it, and I'm sure you can find images of those. They are handmade shoes, usually they're made to give to a child about a couple of months old, a year old. Um, it is said that before the child learn to walk, he or she have to receive a pair of handmade tiger head shoes from the elder. This is a blessing. Um, and the tiger symbolizes guardianship. In Chinese culture, as we talked about before, tiger is one of the most fearsome animal. Tiger is one of the best soldiers for the Jade Emperor in heaven. So having a pair of tigers on their feet means that the child will always be guarded, and evil spirits would have to stay away from them. Sadly, because of modern commercialism, more and more people do not make the tiger head shoes for the newborns in the family anymore. Because a lot of time, the parents, especially parents from my generation, they feel that the tiger head shoes, they're handmade, they're rough looking, they're cheap looking. They don't want their kids to go out and wearing those and get laughed by their friends, and they don't want to get laughed by other people. So they rather buy expensive import shoes for their children. So a lot of times, even if the elders in the family were to clock in the time And it is a lot of work to make a pair of shoes. I mean, I don't know how many of you have tried to sew clothes before, make a sweater or something. If you think that was tough, try making a pair of shoes. That's even tougher. And try to make a pair of shoes that look like a tiger. Yeah, yeah. A lot of time it takes several months of hard work for the elder to produce a pair of tiger head shoes, and it breaks their heart when uh, the parents end up just throwing them away because they feel that they look cheap and they don't look like uh, all the fancy shoes that you can buy at the store. Um, a lot of these old traditions are just slowly fading away because of modern commercialism and all the stuff that we can buy. Um, and while it is good that we are progressing, we are advancing, it does make me feel a little bit sad that me, for example, never did receive a pair of tiger head shoes. I hear a lot of other children, my generation or the previous generation, talk about tiger head shoes handmade by their moms or their grandmothers, uh, and I do feel a little bit of envy that I never got that kind of love or uh, workmanship invested in my shoes as a child. Thank you for checking out today's Wisdom Wednesday. I hope that this has been a relatively interesting episode. We'll be back again tomorrow for some Toy Thursday. For now, 谢谢 and 再见。